Welcome to our new series, Strategically. This is a masterpiece on strategy, strategic fundamentals which are important for a corporate leader, which is a business leader, in politics. It's also important for religious leaders, but also important for your personal life. This is given to you by your master strategist, Professor Ogola, who is a governance expert, strategist, and economist with over 15 years experience of teaching strategy, economics, and governance in one of the leading institutions in Africa and in the world over. And most importantly, penned a book on strategic thinking, 10 lessons from developing over 1,000 strategic plans. I hope you are going to learn something that can be able to transform your corporate, your politics, your religious organizations, personal life, and any other life that you have. Today I want to talk to you about the significance of political branding in an election. And the best way to bring this into context is to imagine a highly contested election or referendum, and that will make you what difference does good branding takes place. So let's start by looking at 2022 election. You saw there was a branding between the hustler versus inawezekana. You saw what happened. There was one narrative that was completely overwhelming. We also will consider what happened in the Brexit. There was the Brexit versus Remain. So you compare a brand, Brexit, you compare another brand, Remain. Brexit were those people who are saying they are voting to exit for England to exit from EU. Remain were people voting to ensure that Britain remains in EU. So let's start asking that. You saw the branding for hustler was very personal. It shows the connection between the person running for office and the people who need to vote. So the hustler narrative, President William Ruto branded himself as a hustler himself, working to liberate the hustlers. And he said that this is against the dynasties who are actually the ones the cause of the problem for the people suffering. And it was so difficult for you to stop him on this. The brand was so imminent that his opponent was actually trying to catch up. So he was the one setting the narrative while others were trying to catch up and stop him. And many political leaders came with different strategies to dismantle the hustler narrative, and they never succeeded. Now, when we come back there, we go to the issue of Brexit versus Remain. When David Cameron saw that he was proposing that people should remain in EU, and many people in England thought that EU was a problem, and he said before he goes to implement the strategies in EU, he took it to a vote. So he said one was Brexit, those who are saying we are leaving EU, and one said Remain. Now, if you look at the word between Brexit and Remain, you can agree with me that the word Brexit looked very romantic, and Brexit looked very attractive. So in a highly contested, if you like, this referendum, you found that Brexit won against Remain. Why? It is the branding made a difference. How did the branding make a difference? Remember that the percentage of those who voted for Brexit was 52% against around 48% who voted Remain. So that will show that close shave, it could just be somebody who was just feeling like Brexit was nice, even without knowing the consequences. They remember immediately after the Britain or England voted for Brexit, there are so many regrets. And they're even wondering how they exited, which means people just became emotional. So branding becomes normally very emotional, and there must be emotional connection between the people and the brand, which is being sold. It could be a brand for referendum. Remember, in Kenya, we are the banana versus the orange. Which fruit do you like? Is it an orange or banana? So sometimes you may find that orange look better than banana. And people said banana is for monkeys and oranges are for everybody. So you could see that branding and politics really connect deeply, depending on how they are positioned. Now, just to make you get these numbers right, and I want to give deeply into the Brexit one to tell you how branding works. When the people branded Remain, people said vote and remain within the EU, they were positioning that if you are able to remain in the EU, you'll enjoy transfer of jobs from England to other EU countries, European countries. They also said that if you voted to remain, your passport will be accepted, that you can enter in any European country without looking for a visa. That every country in Europe was like local arrival, domestic arrival. But if you are able to exit, Brexit that is, you cannot arrive in another European country in the domestic arrival. You have to enter as international arrival, which has to go through the visa and immigration department. So then, this was well positioned. I also said that the job opportunities were bigger in the whole of EU if you remain in the EU, and if you exited EU, then the job opportunities were not there. So that's how they branded the thing. But now look here. I looked at the voting pattern and I saw something very startling. There was the difference between the poor households and the rich households. Rich households tended to vote Brexit because they did not see the need of EU. In fact, they felt that the EU has been one of the reasons why they were poor, because they said that the British economy contributes money to the EU, and that money can be used in a war. It could be used for many other things that were actually removing them from not helping to cure the problem of poverty. While rich people who wanted to enjoy the lagas and the expansive economy of EU tended to vote for Remain. And then look at the percentage of people who voted for Brexit were people who are poor. But percentage of people who voted for Remain were people who are rich. Another thing you can look at this, the demographics. Those the demographics about age, demographics about education, and also demographics about economic empowerment. So in all these demographics, education inequality played a bigger role. People who are highly educated tended to vote for, of course, Remain, and there were a smaller percentage of people. People who were less educated, people who had a qualification lower than high school by British standards, for example, those who don't have a degree, college degree, those people tended to vote for exit, and that is Brexit. Why? Because one need was that if you are saying that you can transfer your degree from England to France, and I don't have a degree, and I don't see when I'll ever have a degree, so what is the use of transferring my grades from England to France or to Spain or even Romania? And also the people who tended to remain were people who had a job that did not require a degree. Those who do manual jobs, those who do casual jobs, those who do not see a need for a degree at all, did not see the need of EU. So by the Brexit being branded as people who, if we exit, you cannot access the economic, let's say, region of the EU, people who have no need to work in France never saw any need to vote for Remain because they saw that they better exit because actually for them, they don't see that. The second thing which was also important about this is that younger people tended to vote for Remain in EU if they were educated. And younger people who are not educated tended to vote for Brexit. At the same time, older people who had traveled and had known more about the EU tended to vote for Remain. But the older people who knew that they will never ever travel out of Britain to go to another country never saw that. And actually, even those people who had passports tended to vote for Remain. Those who never had passport also tended to vote for Brexit because they saw no need. When will they ever travel to another country in Europe? So when you are branding yourself politically, you have to understand who are the voters you want to have to vote for you. If you want people with passport, you can talk about your foreign policy, about East African Community, AU, and the rest. But if you are branding yourself to get people who have never traveled out of Kenya, remember most Kenyans have never even traveled out of their villages. So when you're talking about foreign policy, about how you want to bring East African Community together, how you want to ensure one African country, then how does my mother or grandmother in my village care about you making Africa one country? Will they ever go to Ghana? Will they ever go to Nigeria? So political branding must go with how you want to canvass for votes. It's not just about shouting on top of your roof. Now, I've just come back from New York, Not 1 week is even over because I was from New York on 7th of this month. And there was an election of mayor of New York City. And there were two candidates. One candidate was called Mamdani. Mamdani is originally from India. He was taken to Uganda when he was 7. Then they went to South Africa, and now he went to New York City and acquired the U.S. citizen, and was actually in New York, and now he was contesting for mayor. He was contesting against a candidate called Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo was the governor of New York State, and now he was now contesting for the mayor city of New York City. So how they were branded? Mamdani branded himself as an immigrant. He branded himself as a young person, because actually not branded, but actually he's 34, 36 years. Andrew Cuomo branded himself as a New Yorker, the person who wants to save New York from being inhabited by or controlled by immigrants. Someone who wanted to control and keep the culture, the ways of doing things in New York. But also he branded himself as a capitalist. But you see, Mamdani branded himself as a social democrat. So a social democrat are people who fight for people's rights to free housing, free this, free that. But Andrew Cuomo was a capitalist. So these two things define them. Of course, also you know that Mamdani is a Muslim. I even had people saying in the campaign trail, do you want a mayor who will eat with their fingers, because they believe Muslims eat with their bare fingers? Why don't you, how can New York City have a mayor who eats with bare fingers? Why don't we have a mayor who eats with forks? So you could hear all those ones are all part of branding. Now who won? Is the person who was branded as an immigrant, who said New York City was built by immigrants. New York City has been made great by immigrants, therefore the mayor should be an immigrant. That worked. The Muslim votes also was with him. The young voters was also with him, which means that the branding Andrew Cuomo built was that brand of Trump, the Trump kind of brand that people were actually resenting against. While if you look at Mamdani's brand was the Bernie Sanders brand. Bernie Sanders' brand was more of a social democrat. And you find now New York City, the capital center, the capital headquarter of capitalism, was now voting in a social democrat. Why? It's because capitalism is just for a select few, the owners of capital in New York City. And that number cannot win you an election. So if you want to brand yourself politically, you must consider yourself like the brand you are acquiring. Can this brand reach more people? Can it appeal to people personally? That's why William Ruto took the word hustler. How many hustlers in Kenya? Everybody, nearly everyone is a hustler, apart from just 2 or 3% of Kenyans. And also hustler is personal person, because even in your house, you see yourself as a hustler. You live off your hand to mouth. You find that you are struggling and you are a hustler, and you have someone says, I'm a hustler, I'm running for president to liberate the hustlers. So it was directly appealing to people. Inawezekana was more of an overarching thing. Inawezekana, that was more of a national code, but in Inawezekana, it was not very clear. But this was very clear, from hustler to someone actually can get a job. So branding must go that deep. Remember that the things that go very deep are things that penetrate up to the senior, up to the closest household. When I was campaigning in Uganda to become the MP, I went for healthcare. I was actually used to distribute medicine for arthritis, ulcers, diabetes, and pressure to every household. Every home had a medicine that was called Ogola. So I can say, please, can you bring me Ogola? I take medicine. So that became a household name. So when you want to canvass for votes and brand yourself, you must talk about something that touches everybody. In fact, if there's anything that William Ruto has done bad in his presidency, is the fact that his policies has affected something that affects each and every household. One, education. By having poor policies, capitation, killing free primary education, he's killed every household feels the pinch of William Ruto administration. Second one is healthcare. Every family discusses how they're going to pay their medical bill. So there's always fundraising for medical bills when people are sick or people are dead. There's always fundraising about education, so everybody's affected. So if you forget about everything else you did, you can build road from here to Timbuktu. You can build the super highways. But if people cannot put food on the table, people cannot be able to pay for education and healthcare, then your branding is not helping. Yet he said he's a hustler, and the things that affect the hustler most was not being done. So that's the main thing. Now you hear all these things where people are talking about the politics of branding. Young people want to go to politics. How should you brand yourself? You must talk about something that affects each and every household. I've seen some young people saying, I want to run for MP, I want to run for senator. Some of them are saying, I was abducted by William Ruto, so I want to become a senator. That may not be a problem that affects every household. Now, trying to transition from what made you to become politically aware, which is a good thing, because you are aware that there is injustice in this country, and you want to fight for that injustice. But to sell your policy, to brand yourself as a leader who will solve people's problems, the main problems are healthcare, the main problems are education, the main problems are food security and social protection. You must brand yourself. How can you solve those issues? When you look like the one who can solve those issues, then you become very powerful and as a very big brand. The other example that is worth giving is one of South Africa, under ANC. Remember in the previous election of Ramaphosa, ANC lost control of the houses to the point that ANC had to go for a coalition. Why? Because South Africa discovered that when there was apartheid, apartheid was fathered by the elite, the top class elite of South Africans. They were overthrown and they were taken over by the middle class. So the middle class, the one who have been running ANC for long. Now what happened is that the masses discovered the middle class is their problem, because the middle class are ruling the state by giving themselves higher salaries in government, creating more jobs, bring a lot of very big wage bill for the country, and therefore increasing taxes, are removing so many things that the citizens used to enjoy during apartheid. Now then the issue is that they were looking for some parties that were less middle class were actually giving ANC a run for their money, and therefore ANC almost lost. And I can tell you, to change South Africa now, the upper class need to work with the lower class to overthrow the middle class, because the middle class don't think about production. They think about consumption. They live off state revenue instead of generating profit that can actually protect the town. And that's why you see that actually happen. The branding of the middle class that wants to create more jobs, I'll employ these people, I'll employ that person, but producing nothing is the reason why South Africa rose against ANC. And if ANC is not careful, it is an end of an era. So you find that these are branding that have taken place. You see, for example, even parties in Kenya here, ODM, Orange Democratic Movement. Democratic has been known for ODM. You saw, for example, UDA, United Democratic Movement. Everybody thinks democracy is important, but people don't care about democracy until they can put bread on the table, food, security, until they have healthcare, until they have education, until they have social protection, national security. So instead of branding yourself with these other very amorphous brands, talk about things that can actually work and people care about the most. And now we almost conclude by asking, have you heard that 2027 we might have a choice between 1 term and 2 term? So if I can ask you, between 1 term and 2 term, which one looks more romantic? I can almost bet that 1 term look more romantic than 2 term. Because it is 1 term that made them say the 2 term. And then secondly, even the people 1 term cannot talk well before they mention. The people 2 term cannot actually make sense before they mention something with 1 term. So 1 term is the originator of 2 term. And therefore, if people go for an election, in a highly contested election between 1 term movement and 2 term movement, you can bet my word. If it is closely contested, the branding for 1 term actually will be able to overtake 2 term and win this election. So William Ruto should be very scared if he continues talking about 2 term, because 2 term is not well branded. It is actually 1 term that is most branded. And I end this segment by saying there's a difference between how branding works in corporate and how branding works into politics. I've been a professor of strategy for more than 15 years. I was a professor in Strathmore for 13 years. I taught corporate strategy. I consulted for so many big companies. Actually, I wrote a book called 10 Lessons from 1,000 strategic plans. And I can tell you that in branding, there's something very, very different in corporate and politics. In branding in politics, people can accept biases, prejudices, and sometimes lies. In corporate, it does not work. And I can tell you an example. You know a beer called Tusker Cider? Tusker Cider was targeting women. But who is drinking Tusker Cider? Actually, I can tell you, it is being drunk by the young people. Maybe young boys and sometimes young girls. Why? It's because the women said, oh, so you think we are the one to drink Tusker Cider because we believe that Tusker Cider is light. We go drink Guinness. So you go to the bar, you find now women are telling people, you think Guinness is for men and Tusker Cider is for women. Let us now drink Guinness. For you, you guys drink Tusker Cider. Another thing to falsify this is, do you know who was meant to be drinking vodka? Vodka was developed to be drunk by women. Who is drinking vodka? Is now men. Because vodka was seen to have low alcohol content, whiskey has high alcohol content, so women were supposed to be drinking vodka because they are weaker sex, yet men who stronger sex should drink whiskey. Women said, what a woman can do, women can do better. So women went for what? Whiskey, and left men with the vodka. Lastly, another example. When the manufacturers Land Rover was manufacturing Land Rover Discovery, it was meant to be a man's car. Now just look at your traffic. Watch. See how many men drive Land Rover Discovery as opposed to women. Nowadays, I tend to see more women driving Land Rover Discovery to look like men powerful, telling you what women can do, what men can do, women can do better. So in corporate branding, biases don't work. Prejudices don't work, because actually what happens looks the opposite. So you should be very careful if you are moving your career from corporate going into politics, because what has worked for you in corporate might not work directly in politics. But also if you're moving your career from politics to corporate, don't carry the biases in politics, bring them to corporate, because they may not work. But I cannot end by saying that strategy has fundamentals, and these fundamentals don't change. What I know is that in both corporate and in politics, still we need branding. But how you apply branding in corporate and you apply branding in politics are very different. That's why you have seen very seasoned people in corporate joining politics and they perform terribly. You know about Jim Nambaru, who was a very powerful businessman in town. He tried to run for governor of Nairobi. You can see he almost got nothing as a vote. In fact, it was a no-show. But you see, people who look like Sonko, they have never run any serious business. But when they came to the city, they knew how to do their politics, and it worked. A success in Nairobi was Kidero. Kidero came from business. He must have learned very fast and transitioned from business person to be a politician. He succeeded, but story for another day. We are today talking about politically connected, and today we are talking about strategically, and we can be able to tell you how branding became important. Thank you very much, and see you again in the next show.